Hello everyone and welcome to the Artist Spotlight with me, Simi Jackson, and my guest today, Sadie Valerie. Sadie is an internationally recognised classical oil painter based out of San Francisco in California. Her work has been exhibited across the United States and Europe. As the founder and director of the Sadie Valerie Atelier, an art school for adults from 2009 to 2019, Sadie's taught old master painting and drawing skills to hundreds of students each year. I was actually lucky enough to be invited to give a brush demonstration at Sadie's Atelier a few years ago. Through the experience that Sadie's developed, she's managed to claim the ARC accredited programme for teaching traditional skills to contemporary artists. For those of you who don't know about the ARC programme, it's the top of the league. Sadie's gained a reputation as one of the leading instructors of painting and drawing in the classical tradition throughout the United States, and I will add throughout the year. Throughout the globe. I would like to welcome Sadie. Here we go. Here we go. Welcome. How are you?
Hi, Simi. It's so good to see you.
Hey, sweetie. I'm sorry. I said throughout the year there, and I meant throughout the globe. But hey, I meant every word of that. It's a bit of a mouthful to try and get such a lot about you in such a short space of time. But it's really fabulous what you've achieved and the accolades that you have to your name and the students that you've taught. I bet you've lost count of how many students that you've taught now.
Yeah, well, because my online program, people can subscribe monthly, it sort of revolves throughout the year, but we've estimated it's a couple hundred people a year that start the program.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to just touch on something. I know that this is kind of going back a little to go forward, but when I first visited you guys, you had the physical atelier that I came to. And now you've shifted to completely online. I'm correct there, right? So
right,
now with a pandemic like we've got, that's an amazing move, but that wasn't intentional at the time, I know. So how have you found that move from teaching in person to teaching online?
Yeah, well, I had actually been teaching online since about 2015 or 2016. I taught through a Facebook group way back then. And then we moved the Facebook group. We decided that we didn't want to host it on Facebook in case they changed their rules or something. And so we developed our own platform. I started making videos in about 2015, mostly just to be able to demonstrate for my students and so that they could watch the demonstrations over and over on their own at home, and then they could get the most out of their studio time, because most of my students were coming in 1 or 2 days a week, so the time that they're actually in the studio they had to be painting. And so I had developed, my husband Noel. He's a video editor and a sound designer. He's a musician and a filmmaker. He went to film school, so I'm really lucky to have him. I couldn't afford him, so it's really nice to have him in-house. Right. So he's been helping me make these videos for 5 or 6 years now. So we developed this big library of every single step of the program. And we've been offering that online. So I've been offering that at the same time as I was teaching at the physical school. And of course, we really missed the studio. It was really nice to have a big, beautiful studio in San Francisco. You saw it. We had skylights and we had multiple rooms, and it was a really lovely space to work. But essentially, San Francisco is like a lot of cities, but it's also worse than a lot of cities in that apparently people in technology also like big, huge warehouse spaces with skylights. So the tech industry basically took over all of our sort of artist warehouse kind of space in San Francisco quite quickly. So the prices really went up. So it was a stretch to be in that big space paying very high rent, and we were barely making it. And then when the end of our 5-year lease came, they were going to increase it by almost 20%. And that was that was untenable for us. An art school runs at a very, very tiny profit margin. Sure. So we made the decision to shut down the school and just pour everything we have into the online school. So we've expanded the online school. We've continued to add more and more videos. We're coming out later this month with an entire Barg plate. One of my star students who became one of my instructors did an entire Barg plate. It took him about 120 hours to draw it, and he filmed the whole thing. We edited it down to 8 hours. And so we have an 8-hour course, 1 hour per course, where you can watch the entire process of doing a very detailed Barg plate in graphite. So we're just adding to it all the time.
Of course. Well, I think the thing is that it's so useful to be able to do it in your own time. In your own, you're hitting several people there, right? You're hitting the people that can't do it at the times that you do it because they've got jobs, but also different places around the world. I'm sure you now have people that have subscribed all over, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We have people from everywhere, from certainly all the English-speaking countries, but we even have people from. We have a student from Africa right now, and we have people from Greece and from all sorts of different countries all the time. So that's really nice. And we have sort of a rolling deadline every week, and you just work at your own pace. You submit by a certain time of the week, and then we give written feedback over the next day. And so people submit as they can, and it works just sort of being at your own pace. So this year, especially during COVID, when so many people had to cancel their workshops and their classes, it's been nice for people just to be able to get online and do the program, at home.
Yeah, I mean, so are you saying then that people kind of get the same sort of feedback from you than they would have in person, or do you feel that there's certain things that are different, that you've had to move for people around the globe?
Yeah, I mean, I love working with people in person, because obviously when you're in person, you can look in their eyes and you can see if they're understanding. You sort of see those light bulb moments come over their head where obviously you just have much more immediate interaction with them. But online, we teach in writing online, so it's all written reviews so that people can go back and reread it again.
Yeah.
I and my two instructors, Derek and Ian, who helped me do it, we all really enjoy writing, and so we critique everybody's work through that. Sometimes you kind of just want to reach right through the screen and grab someone's hand and show them what you mean. But we've basically make like little video demonstrations just with my phone even all the time, just to say, hold the pencil like this and do this. And so we do as much as we can. And it's been surprising. When we added cast drawing a couple of years ago, I was surprised that people were actually able to set up one of the beginning casts at home. We guide them how to set it up with lighting, and they can go through the whole process and do a cast drawing as well. So it works amazingly well. I never planned, when you go to teach, you never say, I want to be an online teacher. You just want to be a teacher. So I never really planned for it to go that way. But it's really working well.
It's so smart, I'm telling you now. The not only that it's online, but you can do the thing with you, and I know that you're going to say, oh, don't say it, but I mean it. You're as good online as you are in person. You can do both. You're not just an online teacher, and I think there is a difference, actually, for people who aren't quite as able to be confident in their person, in person, and I know that you have that down as well, but also just the fact that you're running it on your own website. It's exactly what we do, so that we completely manage our own thing. So I guess my only question at that point then is it easier being online for you, or is this a whole heap of different things that you thought, wow, this is actually as full on as it was in person?
Oh, for me, it's much easier in that it's much less hours per week. I used to always be trying to fit in my painting days around teaching, because even the days I wasn't at the studio, I was managing a school, and at the height we had 150 students and 8 instructors. So there was always something going on and something to sort of manage or deal with. And so I was spending hours every day, even when I wasn't at the studio teaching, hours every day, planning all the courses, marketing all the courses, and interacting with students and teachers as they needed. So to have all of that just suddenly go away, I just, for the first time in 10 years, I just have tons of studio time, which is really, it's actually been really, really good for me. I feel very torn about it because it was very upsetting for the community to lose the space, and I really miss my students, and I really miss the feeling of being in a space together. Um, but in terms of my personal artwork, which of course I'm an artist first and a teacher second, for my personal artwork, it really actually needed to happen. I've been able to just focus so much more on my studio work.
Yeah, those students will still follow you throughout, and you know, there's something like this now that you can offer is like is a halfway. At least you didn't say, that's it, I'm never teaching again, leave me alone, I've changed my number, you know. So
actually, a group of my students did get together, and they rented their own studio, and they bought some of my furniture just so that they had a place to go and be together to work, even though they could rent a studio somewhere else, to work with other people working in the classical tradition, or even just working representationally or realistically. You kind of want to be surrounded by artists who are doing the same thing. So I was really touched that a group of my students went and did that so they could be together. So of course, this year they've had to stagger all the time that they're at the studio, so they're only there one or two people at a time. But I'm glad that they were able to do that. And so I'm still in touch with them. Sometimes I give them critiques if they ask for critiques, and they can sort of hire me for a one-on-one. So I'm glad it continues in that way.
Yeah, definitely. You know, that's the way it's got to go. And like you say, selfishly for you, which too right at that point, you had to move it to something else, which, I mean, let's look at it now in light of what's happened. What would have happened if you still had the place, you know, the atelier, and this had happened? Who knows? So yeah,
we couldn't have survived a month if we had to refund everybody and close all our classes. We were paying such high overhead every single month for that space. So yeah, we were. I mean, there's no way we could have predicted it, but you know, we went online a year ahead of all of that. So the timing kind of worked out.
So when you say that you've been able to work on your works, tell us more. Tell us, what did that mean, that you were able to free up that headspace? What did you do? Okay, so a month in, you know, after you got over the initial shock of there's nobody bothering me, the students aren't here. What did it mean for you?
I was just say, we closed. That's a good question. We closed in June of last year. And I have to say, the whole second half of the year, I did some paintings, but I pretty much like slept for 6 months. I was so tired. I had been running the atelier for 10 years, and it was a monthly struggle just to get the bills paid, and just all that stress. And I almost didn't realize how exhausted I had been until it ended.
Right.
And you know what it's like running your own business. Of course, I know you know that. It's just, you just eat, sleep, drink, and breathe it all day long, every day. So it takes a lot of discipline to get a life balance there.
It does.
So essentially the school ended, and I just needed time to rest. But starting in January this year, I felt more energized than I've ever felt in years in terms of excitement for the studio. And then when COVID hit, I feel like probably like a lot of people, I sort of went like smaller and more internal, and doing things more just personally for myself, not thinking about whether it was going to go to a gallery, kind of just this very sort of closing in feeling, which actually doesn't feel bad to an artist. It was nice to sort of go into a hermit mode. So I've been doing a lot of small works, a lot of small studies, seashells and flowers, and mostly just really focusing on how the paint moves. And using brushes and buying new brushes and experimenting with new ones, and sort of less about the subject and less about making a finished work, and more about exploring just how the paint goes down, and how to apply the paint and working more with transparency and all sorts of different things, and studying a lot. Actually, I feel like a student. I'm just studying old master paintings all the time. I've done a lot of master copies this year. just kind of trying to um, get inside the head of the masters that I really admire and learn as much as I can from them. And part of that is COVID, and part of that is closing the school, and that I almost feel permission to be a student again. I mean, I think as a painter, you're a lifelong student.
Yeah.
But I've just been going very, very internal.
I was going to ask you, is there a difference between painting as Sadie, who runs an atelier, versus you as yourself? Do you feel that shift?
There's definitely a difference in how I feel online or how I feel in public. When I'm running a school, as the director of the school, I felt like anything I did online, I was sort of representing my school, or my school was my brand. We talk so much in the last 15 years or 10 years on Facebook about building your brand or whatever. And so I felt like the school was my brand. I and the school are inseparable. And if I were to do it again, I probably wouldn't name the school after myself. I think, well, Rosemary does it,
I
of course.
I know, and it's so personal.
But there's a way that it really weds your identity to the business, which is both positive, but also sort of feels like a constant connection. So, so now it's kind of nice just to be an artist again, and be primarily an artist again.
Yeah.
And of course I teach online, but it's just different.
Yeah, well, I've got to tell you, you've got nothing to worry about having a school named after you, because the caliber and the standard that you set is so good. You have nothing to worry. It would be awful if it wasn't, but it isn't. You know what I mean? But I do know what you're saying, because when it's so personal, you probably felt like every move you made and every step you took, that people were watching you and thought that you were the leader. The leader of the pack.
Yes.
But at least now you can do you, and you also have that, and you have two separate ways and a screen between as well. So there is that side of it. And then obviously, the guys that you've got working with you then, are they people that you've trained up from scratch, or?
Yeah. Derek Speaker and Ian Zaffer Hurtado are two students. They were students of mine for many years at the studio. They got to the point where when I had the physical studio, I hired them to help me teach the beginners. And beginners were anybody who had been working with me for 2 years or less. Yeah. And so they and a few other very small handful of students were selected to be able to do that. And so I really came to rely on them. And then once the school closed, they had both been working for me, like all artists, it's a gig economy. They were working some for me, some in other jobs. And so, the occasional, commission, and they're building their art careers. And so, you kind of take whatever different multiple income streams. But when I closed the school, I knew I was cutting off one of their primary income streams. So I really wanted to do everything I could do to keep them on and keep them busy if they wanted to. They know exactly how I critique. They know exactly what to look for. And so when somebody submits a sphere drawing, they have developed the eagle eye that I've developed in terms of exactly how to use their pencil to fill in all the white dots or take out all the black dots, and exactly all the things that I critique. So as all the way up through the drawing program, and Derek has gone through the painting program as well, they essentially say everything I would say, because they've been working with me for years.
That's a blessing. That's a blessing, right?
I really couldn't do it without them. I mean, they're fantastic, and the students feel very comfortable with them too. The students get very attached to them, because sometimes they'll be working, the way it works is people will be members for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and they'll be submitting work every week or a couple times a week. And so they'll be interacting with all of us or one of us for weekly for years.
Yeah.
And so we develop pretty close online relationships with people. In terms of art, we don't actually so we care a little bit, like if they get sick or if something happens in their life, but in terms of watching their artistic development, we sort of develop a bond with them.
Yeah, I can imagine, because you get to know where you can see a development, right? So over time,
yeah,
you celebrate their highs and their lows.
Putting in so much time.
Yeah.
That's
amazing. So those guys, they're able to work virtually as well. So everybody can work from their own spaces.
Yeah, exactly. Which is who knew how crucial that was going to be for this year.
No, right. You just couldn't have written it. I'm just so happy that it's worked out for you, because it hasn't for so many people. So I want to ask you a couple of questions that if I was a student watching this now, some of the things that you say, I'm going to pretend I don't know the answers, which I actually don't, and ask you to backtrack a little bit. So one of the things that you mentioned was drawing and then going on to painting. Is that an essential that you would start with drawing and then to painting, or can you skip, or do people, or shouldn't you, kind of thing?
That's a really good question. That's actually probably one of the primary questions we get. Okay. I teach 3 different methods of painting. I teach direct, indirect, and alla prima. And indirect is when you're building up lots of layers and letting them dry between each layer, and it can be as many as 10 or 12 or 15 layers to get a really high finish and a high degree of realism. That's the most technical and the most advanced. Mm-hmm. Direct and alla prima, well, they're all difficult. Nothing's not advanced when it comes to painting.
Yeah.
But alla prima and direct are usually what I have. If somebody's brand new to painting, I have them start with those because they can pick up a brush and just start working in color right away. So a lot of times people come to me, either they haven't ever painted before, more often they've painted in one method and they want to learn a new method of painting. So anybody can subscribe and jump in at any point in the program and follow every single lesson, or jump around. You get access to the whole thing. If you subscribe, you get instant access to absolutely everything we offer. Or you can just go to the website and you can just buy a course, buy one course or buy 2 courses or buy 3 courses or buy them as they come out. So you can sort of decide whether you want to own it or whether you want to subscribe to it. So people can really jump in and do whatever they want. Once they get into the point where they're getting feedback from me, and that's from me and my instructors, that's a second level of subscription. Okay. So they pay an additional fee so that they can submit their work. Now, ever since COVID, for the same price, we've been offering 2 times a week instead of just once a week. Wow. So we have a lot of people submitting 2 times a week, which just helps them move much faster through the program. So once sometimes people start and they share paintings with me, but as you know, so much of painting is shape and value, and shape and value, light and dark, is drawing. And it's very hard to learn to draw through the medium of paint. Paint is just slippery and difficult to control, and if you're not really adept at painting, it's just hard to teach principles of shape and value purely with paint. I find it that way. And classical realism and the atelier style of training or method of training is based on the idea that students spend time really mastering drawing and then going to painting. Right. So when somebody starts to work with me, if they submit paintings, usually the first thing I notice is shape problems or value problems. And if they're struggling with shape and value, they need to go study drawing. And so I will give people a critique on their painting and talk to them about materials and brushes and whatever they need to do technically with their painting. But if we're going to start getting into how light is behaving in their painting, that's usually a value issue. And if they're struggling with that in paint, it means that they're going to get a lot of benefit out of drawing. What I always tell people is if you can take 2 months or 6 months or ideally 2 years and only draw and just put down painting and take a break, when you come back to painting, you will be a better painter than if you had spent that same amount of time painting.
Yeah.
So obviously we have a huge emphasis on drawing.
It makes total sense when you say it. I just know that a lot of people are so eager to get going,
Yeah.
you know, and I think like if I said now I want to start painting, I think it looks like, you know, it's really something I want to do, and then you said but you've got to draw for 2 years, and I go, oh no, but I want to paint. You know, so what's a halfway for people like that would say, you know, but I want to get painting, but I don't want to do, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a way that there is the ideal sort of military or very, very organized way of studying that is designed to teach a young artist or teach a beginning artist in a way that avoids pitfalls. However, pitfalls is part of the process of learning. And so I think most people actually kind of zigzag a lot, or go forward and then go back, and go forward further and then go back and then go forward further. And that's a really normal artistic process. So essentially what people do, what I do, what everybody does, you try something that's probably even harder than you thought it was going to be.
Right.
As hard as you think it's going to be, it ends up being harder. And so you have an idea of your painting that you want to make, and you make it, and it just doesn't look like how you want it to look. If that hasn't happened yet, it will happen. So you sort of get to a point where you try again, and you find you're just not able to break through a plateau, sort of. Even if you feel like you've been developing, you'll hit a point where all artists hit it, where suddenly you just can't break through. Right. At that point, taking some time at that point to change mediums, focus on drawing, or do something different, get a new teacher, get a new perspective, something to kind of push through that plateau is really needed at that point. At that point, some people give up. They feel like they're not talented enough. They feel like they're not good enough. They feel like it should be easy. So I actually do quite a lot of coaching in terms of managing the psychological aspect of being an artist, of how do you still think of yourself as an artist even if you're having a whole year where you're really struggling. Because during that year or a month or week or day, if you're lucky a day, you know, for me it can be a year at a time, when you feel like you are just can't paint the way you really dream of painting, and you feel very frustrated about that, the urge to either give up or to be really hard on yourself, you feel like you need to push yourself harder, when usually the opposite is true. Usually you need to have more grace, more flexibility, more self-care. You know, you need to actually sort of pull back a little bit before you can go forward. So I actually do quite a bit of just coaching people on managing the emotional ups and downs of being an artist, and also let them know that happens to me, that happens to every professional artist I know. It's a normal part of the development. It's just less scary. In the beginning, it's scary because you feel like you might really should just give up. But then you realize every professional artist feels the same way quite often, quite regularly, and you just learn how to push through it.
Do you know, I'm so grateful that you've said that, because one of the reasons why I wanted to do these informal talks, chats, whatever you want to call them, is that people will look up, well, they'll either already know you and they'll be excited for the interview, or they'll look you up after and go, whoa, and overnight they'll think that you've achieved what you've done overnight, whether that's with the school, you know, whether that's online, whether that's the standard, you know what I'm saying? And I know, and you know, that that's not the truth, but I think for somebody to just walk into this interview and hear from you straight away that actually even professionals struggle at this level, and this is something that we go through cycle after cycle, and that, you know, it's quite refreshing, I'm sure, for people to hear that. So thanks for throwing a lifeline there, because it's true.
Yeah, I feel like this sort of myth of talent or in natural ability has really been very damaging to our culture as a whole. You know, we have this idea that if you're not naturally gifted in the arts, that you shouldn't do them.
Right.
Which is, I think we're all, I mean, every child draws, every child acts, every child sings, every child dances. Why stop? You
Right.
know, why should we stop any of
Right.
those things? And if you look, you know, in many cultures, art is not separate from life. Art is just part of life. And, you know, in Western culture, we've sort of compartmentalized, like, oh, now I'm going to do art now, and the rest of my life is not art.
Right.
And so, you know, integrating that is a healing process that our culture needs and that we all need as individuals.
Yeah, it is. And it's got to be something that you can eat, sleep and breathe your way through, but at peace with yourself, I think. You know, there's no point going into this if you're constantly playing with that trauma of, you know, can I do it? Can I not do it? You've got to enjoy it along the way, right? I don't know a single artist though that hasn't said. Right. I don't know a single artist.
What was that?
Sorry. I don't know a single artist that doesn't say that painting isn't hard though. You know, that's something I hear all the time.
Yeah. You've got a good glimpse into that. You see people, you know, in workshops and dealing with that struggle. It can feel like a very lonely struggle. And then people like you or teachers like me, we see so many people, we realize that everybody's struggling in this way.
Yeah.
And so just knowing that that's just part of the process. And, you know, I just was writing to a student just yesterday who's going through a difficult emotional time. And they sort of had this idea like, I want to be a great artist and I'm just going to be miserable until I'm great. And I'm just like, oh, you're never going to feel great. Nobody ever feels great.
Right. Right.
If you have 1 second a year for a minute where you're like, oh, I'm pretty good. That's it. That's all you get.
Yeah.
1 second a year.
I'm just going to help you manage your expectations here.
Yeah.
So I suppose that leads me to like times when you do feel great, okay? And I want to ask you, what is the importance of entering into competitions? What would you say is important about that for your career and for you personally as an artist?
Okay. Honestly, I think the most important thing about entering is to submit it and then forget about it. And if you win, you win. And if you get acknowledgement, you get acknowledgement. And if you don't, kind of just forget that you ever even submitted. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes for selecting who wins those things. Having been on the jury side of it, it ends up being very subjective decisions. There's often a lot of really good quality work, and you're trying to select work that doesn't look like, say, the last person who won, or doesn't, you know, your top 4 choices don't all look like similar kinds of work. And so there's a lot of things that go into choosing who wins, that isn't just about who's the best. Yeah. It isn't just about, there's a lot of other factors as well. And so in terms of, is this work appropriate for this particular contest? You know, is this work appropriate for this particular group in the top 4 or the top 10? And so I always tell people, go ahead and submit to lots of things. You know, keep track of it in a spreadsheet or in your email or wherever you keep track of what you've submitted where. But kind of just forget about it until you get a notification that you've won something. Yeah. It's just not worth the emotional ups and downs. It puts you through so much emotionally if you're disappointed when you don't get something, that I kind of actually like make a bubble around myself. I just don't pay attention to it, because otherwise it would be such a big up and down throughout the year of like, oh, I submitted to this big thing and I'm waiting to hear if I got it, and then I didn't get it. Most things you don't get. Yeah. And so I go through enough, like managing my emotional experience, managing who I interact with and who affects my emotional life, that I really try and limit what's going to make me have a big up or a big down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I'm with you.
so I would say just don't ride the emotional wave.
Yeah.
So,
It's can be so daunting and so off-putting. You enter something, you never hear back. You enter two or three, and some of them are expensive, you know. So I think that's a nice thing to take away from that, is bubble yourself from it and try and forget about it. And if you hear a ping notification that's good, then that's great and you're back on track.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I think one of my
yeah.
friends, and I know she's a friend of yours too, Shayna, she said at one point, she said, you know, just because I didn't win this competition, but I actually won it in this competition, or I came third, she said, but it just wasn't their thing. But I did it for me, you know, so that's
Yeah,
something to take from it,
exactly.
right?
And it might win a different year
Yeah,
too. Like it can really change year to year. You could enter the same piece in the same contest the next year, and you might have a different result. It's
yeah,
just there's just so many factors involved.
yeah,
To take it as um, an evaluation of the quality of your work is just heartbreaking. Don't
yeah,
ever let anybody else decide the quality of your work. The only thing that matters is whether you love it.
yeah.
So,
And your partner, because if they don't, usually you'll you'll be telling them all night. If they don't love it, you're in big trouble.
I'm lucky because my partner loves every single thing I do.
Yeah,
And
and
years
that
and years ago, he's seen my whole development. 15 years ago, I would do a painful little still life, and he'd be like, "Oh, I love it. This is amazing." And I look back at it now, and I'm like, I can't believe you were that encouraging of that horrible work.
But don't you
But you
think
need someone to be a cheerleader.
that's your secret success to a good marriage, you know?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Listen, I'm going to ask you now a couple of questions that I've had ping through. So I've written them on the screen because I forget these things. So
Mhm.
I want to ask you, okay. This was a good one. For those wanting to step up from being a beginner, so they class themselves as a beginner, to someone who takes this more seriously, which books would you recommend to me? Are there any must-have
I would
books?
Yes, I would say all of Juliet Aristides' books,
Mm-hmm.
Classical Drawing Atelier, Classical Painting Atelier, it just instantly became the foundational library for any student who's interested in classical training. I really believe that classical training is what propels you from one level to the next level, much like uh, classical piano.
Mm-hmm.
If a jazz musician or a rock star goes and studies classical piano for a little while, they're gonna increase their knowledge of music.
Right.
And so all of Julia Aristides' books are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
The funny things, I have to tell Juliet this, but sometimes people think I wrote her books because we both live on the same coast of the United States, and uh, uh, we both run ateliers, and we're both women, and we're exactly the same age. We look nothing alike. But I get probably an email a month from someone saying, "I love your books. I have all of them, and I haven't read the book."
Really? Isn't that
So,
crazy?
yes, I have to emphasize that Juliet Aristides is not Sadie Valeri. We're two separate people. I do have one of her book covers has my painting on it, which I
Right.
think confuses people.
That could be
So,
part of it. Well, for anyone wondering about Juliet, I'm actually going to have her on in a couple of weeks' time, and I can then confirm to everybody that you are different people. She looks different, you sound different, you are definitely different people. So I'll help clear that one up for you, don't worry. Oh, she's going to find that so I bet you she gets the same thing.
I actually I've been meaning to ask her that. I've never gotten around to asking her that, so I would love to know the answer. So
I'm going
you
to
can
ask
ask
her.
her
If
that.
you're okay with it, I'll
Happens
ask her.
in galleries as well. Somebody once came up to me and said, "Oh, I love your painting," and I was like, "I don't have a painting up in this show. I'm just here." And they were like, "It's right over there," and I was like, "That's Juliet's painting."
Well, do you know, when you've got two powerhouses like you two, that's got to be a compliment from either of you, because
I I take it as a huge compliment. I
Right.
take it as a huge compliment.
Right. So they're the books that we're going to be recommending. Okay. What about, so that includes painting as well. That's drawing and painting books, right? The classical painting
That's
books.
drawing and painting.
Okay.
Yeah. And she actually has an excellent book for beginners if anybody just wants to get into sketching, she just released a really, really lovely sketching book for absolute beginners. I've given it as gifts to a lot of people in my life. You know, when you're an artist, a lot of people in your life are like, I would love to be able to draw. And
Right.
Juliet's beginning drawing book makes just an amazing gift.
I'll post those in the comments below for the person who asked, if anyone else wants to know. Okay, someone had asked, do you have any advice on keeping your palette clean?
Yes. At the end of every day, I just scrape it down, take all the big chunks of wet paint off, and then wipe it down with turpentine.
Mm-hmm.
When I use a wooden palette, mm-hmm. and I use New Wave palettes, which I adore. The surface is just beautiful to work on in terms of mixing and using your palette knife on it. And before that, when I used a wooden palette that wasn't treated, New Wave has just this great surface on it. When I used a more raw wood palette, I would just use linseed oil. I wouldn't use any turpentine because I actually wanted to build up that skin mm-hmm. of paint on the surface. So if you're using a wooden palette that is not New Wave, mm-hmm. just use linseed oil. For New Wave palettes, I actually use turpentine to take off the paint because the surface that they have is just perfect.
Yeah, it doesn't come off, right? It's already treated. Right. Okay, I have another question for you. Another person has asked, what do you recommend for your drawing techniques? So what are the key things that they've got to get together to get going?
Do you think that's in terms of materials?
Yeah, I guess so, for the drawing techniques, right. Yeah.
For drawing materials. Yeah, actually on my website, I have all my materials lists are free on my website. You can look at all the links to everything.
Yeah.
And so you can go through that list. All of my students start with graphite pencils. Mm-hmm. They start with Staedtler. Tombow Mono pencils, the Japanese brand, are just amazing, amazing pencils. So we sort of graduate to those ones when you develop more sensitivity and you can really appreciate how wonderful those pencils are. We just work on Strathmore paper. Mm-hmm. We start on Strathmore drawing paper. And then we're going to spend, we spend 100 hours on a drawing. Mm-hmm. And so for that, we use a thicker Bristol smooth paper. Okay. And then kneaded eraser and a stick eraser. So the kind that's like a retractable pen that you have a very fine tip on for really, really detailed stuff. The way I teach with pencil and the way my students use pencil is just very, very detailed, down to just the grain of the paper. So it's more about pressure sensitivity and how sharp your point is. Mm-hmm. I have videos on how to sharpen your pencil with a lead about that long and sharp enough to draw blood. Yeah. And so sometimes people think that's sort of arbitrary that I'm making people do it, but there's actually a direct correlation between how well somebody draws and how well they sharpen a pencil. Right. So if they're struggling with sharpening their pencil, they're struggling with the dexterity of drawing. So it really is a dexterity exercise. And everybody's always asking me, can I just use mechanical pencils? I'm like, well, you can cheat your way through life.
Yeah. The wrong question to ask. Well, I'll post down below as well. I'll go on your website and find the material section. But I think one of the things I took from that, though, is that you could get started relatively inexpensively, which I think often puts people off.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. You can get started. You can go in the art supply store and buy a couple pencils and a pad of paper and an eraser and get started right away. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there's not a big financial barrier. Even to painting, there's not a big financial barrier. I have a beginning painting video where I just list just just 4 colors, just the most affordable panel that I think is the best quality. So all my materials lists are the best quality for the most affordable prices.
Sure.
I do like people to use good brushes. It's better to have, I mean, we can get into brushes now if you want, but it's
Why
better to
not?
have a few really, really good brushes than to have a whole bunch of low quality brushes. I mean, why make yourself struggle?
Well,
So.
do you know, since you did that so effortlessly, I will say I'm so impressed.
It just happened.
That was brilliant. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play a video right now that you haven't seen yet, but it's a video that Joe, our videographer guy, is with some brushes around of your brush set, and then we'll talk specifically for a couple of minutes.
Part of that online. That's beautiful.
Well, we've done one for you fresh out the oven today, so here we go. So we can talk about brushes. So I guess one of my first questions I wanted to ask you, because I know that people will wonder this, is what is it that, I know that you like natural hair and synthetic hair, so what is the difference for you? Why is it important to have the both?
It's much more about how the brushes handle the paint. They have to have the exact right amount of spring. They can't be too floppy, but they can't be too stiff. If a brush is too stiff, then you're basically scraping up as much paint as you're putting down. And so you want snap and flexibility. And there are synthetics now. I mean, in the 90s, when I was in the late 80s, when I was in art school, synthetics were just horrible. They were just, I don't know, it was like painting with plastic, exactly how you would think it was. But synthetics are so much better now. That really, it's more about the feel of the brush. If it has the right snap, and if it has the right flexibility, and if it can really hold a lot of paint, that's really what I look for.
Yeah. So what about shapes then? What I mean, in your brush set, you favor long flats. Is that across the board, or is that was that a momentarily thing? Is that?
I'm finding that I kind of go through like periods of years where I focus on one brush shape. Just in the last year, I've been using flats for years and years, primarily because for direct painting, and especially alla prima painting, I've learned so much, and I've been so inspired by my good friend Daniel Keys, who taught a lot of workshops at my studio. One of the benefits of owning a studio, as you know, is you get to invite the artists that you admire most, and then you get to learn everything you want from them. So Daniel introduced me to flat brushes. He also introduced me to rosemary brushes years and years ago.
I was going to ask
teaching
you,
workshops with years.
Is that how you heard of us, through Daniel?
I think I also heard of you online. On Facebook, but I hadn't bought any of your brushes until I worked with Daniel and saw how he uses them, and well, he uses them very well. Maybe if I have a brush like that, I'll be able to do that. Isn't that what we all do? But I don't know. I mean, once you go, I mean, this is like a totally shameless plug, but once you use a rosemary brush, it's kind of hard to go back and use anything else. I mean, they're just, so I have hundreds now. I buy them for myself for every birthday, every Christmas, every time I have money I want to buy myself an extra present, I buy myself a few more rosemaries. So I've been buying much more rosemaries, I've been using much more filberts recently. And I think that's actually more because I've been doing more portraits and doing master copies of portraits. And I feel like if you're going to be painting a human subject, for me, the filbert just makes softer edges and a softer shape. I don't feel quite the need of using the corners of the flats quite as much. What I like about flats is you can get a really broad mark, but then you can turn it on the side and you get teeny tiny little marks from the exact same brush. So it's not so much that they're a square shape, it's that they have just such a huge variety within one brush.
So if I had to ask you a hard question here, well, I've got lots, but I'm going to ask you one first, which is, what is the lifespan of a brush? What do you expect it to last? How long do you expect it to last for?
Well, my brushes literally last forever, and I try and tell everybody to clean their brushes the way I clean my brushes, but not everybody listens. But my brush, I don't think I've ever thrown a rosemary away, and I've been using them for years and years and years, and they look very similar to exactly how they were when I bought them. And that's because I wash them every day in a natural terpenoid, which is almost like a gel. It's almost like leave-in hair conditioner. And I leave it in the brush overnight, and then I wash it out before I use it again. So it's almost like I'm coating my brushes in like a thick conditioner. And so they hold their shape because it dries to sort of a pliable gel. So they hold their shape. So even if I have, rosemaries don't tend to splay out, but if I do something damaging to one, if I want to reshape it, sometimes you want variation in your brush, but if I want to reshape it to the way it came directly from the store, I just shape it with a little bit of natural terpenoid. Natural terpenoid, it's not natural, like don't drink it. It's natural in that it's not a chemical solvent. I don't know, I think they make it from orange peels or something, but it's more, I don't use it in my paint. You definitely don't want to use it in your paint because the whole point of it is it never dries. It dries to like a soft, pliable gel. And so you would never want like soft, squishy thing in your painting, obviously. So it's really just a brush cleaner. The bottle should say brush cleaner. It should not say paint thinner.
I have the video, so I can put that underneath as well to link people through to the system that you have, because it's perfect. We keep putting these videos out. I've asked lots of people to make brush cleaner videos, and even I think the one thing that these videos should show is that everybody has a different system, but everybody's system works for themselves, and it's one of the things that we get asked all the time. You can well imagine.
I'm sure.
So you're saying then, just to recap, the life expectancy of a brush, is that down to you being meticulous, would you say? Are you doing something different than what you see your students doing?
I would also say the palette has a really, really big impact. It's one of the reasons that I use the palettes that I do. I either cure the surface to be very smooth, or I use the New Wave palettes, or glass palette works the same way. When you think about it, every stroke you're making with the brush and the canvas, you've probably made 10 strokes on your palette. And so your palettes can really wear out your brushes. So I would say that's probably the number one thing, even more than cleaning, that's important for maintaining your brushes. Some people love to destroy their brushes. You don't necessarily have to have pristine brush. I probably tend to be for painters on the pristine side. I am pretty meticulous about my brushes. Not in life. My husband doesn't let me do the dishes because I apparently can't wash a dish well, but I can clean brushes very, very well.
Well, talking about brush killers, Daniel Keyes is a brush killer, and I interviewed him on this show a couple of weeks ago, and I'm telling you now, we talked about how he doesn't look after brushes. So, and I know you'll have seen it when he's come and taught, at your place. That he just leaves brushes in Gamsol, head down, and just kills them. He's not bothered about it. But he actually he prefers that ruggedness and the curvature and all the rest of it. He loves that. Yeah,
and he uses it to great effect. In fact, if I want to paint more like him, I should probably start doing it. But I'll let Daniel be Daniel and I'll just be myself.
Do you know, I wanted to...
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your personal taste, but...
Yeah. So I'm going to ask another question about brushes then, if you're okay with that. One of the things people ask a lot, and I'm sure your students have too, is how you hold a brush. And I wondered if you could just talk us through that, because it's...
Sure. Yeah, I didn't plan this. I honestly didn't plan it, but I do have my tray of brushes right over there. So.
There you go.
So a lot of times people, if they feel like they want control, they feel like they need to hold their brush like way up here, like the way you would if you're writing with a pencil. And what that's actually doing is it's making you press pretty hard with the brush. And so, can you hear me okay? What that's actually doing is kind of making you press really hard with the brush. And so the longer I paint, the more years that I paint, the further back I hold my brush. Wow. It feels like less control, but you're actually developing more sensitivity so that you actually have greater control in that you feel really sensitively the pressure that you're putting and how much paint is on the brush, and you can just very, very lightly touch the surface of the painting if you're holding it further back. If you're holding it up close like this, it's almost like you're gouging the surface of the painting. So I think for years I held it like here, and then for a few years I held it here, and now I'm holding it like way back here. Wow. Especially for the earliest stages of the painting. Like in the very final stages, if I'm doing lots of little details, if there is a very detailed painting, I'll hold it close and I'll lean my hand on a maul stick just to like get really, really small details. But that's like, if you're doing that at the beginning of a painting, you're probably going to hate your painting at the end. You're just overcommitting anyway. So I always tell students hold it far back because the way you hold your brush has a lot to do with how you're approaching the painting. And if you're approaching the painting with a feeling of openness and flexibility and frankly joy and softness, you're going to allow the work to evolve, and it's just sort of a psychological attitude. Whereas if you're holding your brush like this and you're trying to control the painting and you're very tense and you're very tense inside yourself, you might just find that you're not happy with your painting at the end, because painting is just pretty hard to control. Right. So even if you do need details, still hold it lightly and use a light touch.
So, daft question then, the larger you go on a painting, does that affect the brush size for you, or do you use the same sort of sizes regardless?
I definitely use bigger brushes on a bigger painting. In general, I try and use the biggest brush possible for the job. I really, for the exact same reasons I was just talking about, the way you hold the brush, I really resist going with small brushes. I'll start out with big brushes. I'll do as much of the painting as I possibly can, and I'll be using just the tips of the brushes. I'll make myself sort of work very hard to get as much as I can out of a big brush before I allow myself to switch to a smaller brush. And what I find often with more beginner students is that they want to go for the small brush first, again, because it feels like more control. But you want to be open. You want to be looking at your whole work. You don't want to be zoomed in on the details. So working with the largest brush you can for as long as you can before you sort of give yourself the reward or the permission of going, yay, now I get to go to a smaller brush.
Yeah. It's interesting because of the detail that your paintings have. I think a lot of people would not believe that you go for such a larger brush versus the smaller, But that, I guess, is just over time experience of knowing that you can control it, right?
Yeah, I mean, especially for indirect work, which is the most detailed work that I do. I used to paint the whole painting with a small brush. And you're painting in layers, right? So then I paint the whole painting again with a small brush, and then I paint the whole painting again with a small brush. And I just found that I felt like I needed to do that, and I probably did need to do that earlier on. but I found that it's actually like way more efficient to use a bigger brush, a very large brush in the beginning. Just get that first layer down, get that second layer down.
Yeah.
And as I'm doing the final layers, I'll spend, 4 weeks on one painting, and it's the only painting I'm working on. So yeah, the last week I'm only working with very small brushes. But, the point is to get the paint onto the canvas. So it's really about the paint and the canvas. Sometimes we think that we have to push hard. We think so much about the brush. We actually just need to be thinking about the brush is just a tool to manipulate the paint. Sure. The paint is what we're painting with.
Sure. I was going to ask you then, have you got any advice on varnishing and finishing up a painting at that point?
I do, and I tend to do everything like the most old-fashioned way I can find. But in the last year or two, I've totally violated all of my personal rules about being very historically accurate with the way I varnish, because I'm just tired of it. It's just too hard. It's so hard to varnish, and I use spray varnish. Okay. I love it. I get a perfect surface every time. I no longer apply varnish with a brush.
Okay.
I don't know why. I struggle with varnish far more. Like, I talk to artists about it all the time. They're like, whatever, you just varnish. For me, there's always a problem.
Yeah,
so I use Krylon spray varnish, which doesn't help much for brushes.
No, but don't worry about that. I was just going to say, is you're not the only person that's talked about spray varnish. By the way, I know a couple of my friends have used the spray varnish. I know Casey Barr has used spray varnish in the past as well. And so I was going to ask you then at that point, is that the idea just for speed so that you can then get it straight out to a gallery, or is...
No, for me it's not speed, it's the surface.
Okay.
What happens when I spray it on, there's different surfaces. Some is more shiny, some is more matte, and you can sort of choose. There's a couple different grades. And if you spray it, I do it outside so I don't breathe it. I mean, it's aerated glue, which is why I've always been against it. I don't think that you should be breathing glue. So I use it outside, and if my husband can convince me, he makes me wear a ventilator as well. But I definitely use it outside on a sunny day, and it just makes a really nice surface. It's not too shiny, it's not too matte, and it's really smooth. And if there's a hair in there, it doesn't get flattened down, or if there's a piece of lint, it just gets frosted, and I can literally just take a tweezer and pick it off, and it doesn't hurt the painting. You would never know it was there.
Yeah.
So I just find it, I resisted it for years and years and years. It's really a much more modern and modernist tool for painting, and just on principle, I didn't use it for a long time. I just felt like, I just don't like cheating.
I know.
So I like doing things the hard way, but the hard way wasn't giving me the good results.
No.
So it's all about.
So I'd say, I promise, we won't tell anyone.
I'm telling all my students now. I'm like, forget it. I've been telling you for years I've been telling them for a couple of years, just use spray varnish.
Yeah.
And they come in from outside with their painting. When I had the studio, they would go out in the parking lot and do it, and they would come in and they'd be like, oh my gosh, this is so much easier. I can't believe we've been doing it the hard way for so long.
Well, I hope that that's something that a lot of people take from this, because I do agree with you. A lot of people want to be traditional and classical with it and do the old school way. But like you said, if it doesn't get you the good results, sometimes you got to change. You got to make the change. Yeah. Actually, on that note, I have a funny story. I'm going to share this with you, and then I'm going to let you go because I know that you're busy. But I was over in Florence a couple of years ago, and I went to Daniel Graves. I was fortunate enough to be invited to Daniel Graves' his studio. So I show up, and it's very traditional. I'm sure, have you been? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've been.
I have not been. He actually invited me last time I was in Florence, but I wasn't able to go. But I have watched his videos, and you get a nice tour of his studio and his videos, and it's beautiful.
It's phenomenal. So Daniel's making everything himself, right the way through to you walk in and, you know, he's got wood burning with charcoal getting ready at the bottom, you know, and so I'm walking in and there's ground paint ready to go and everything. And I just said to her, I said, Daniel, surely that you've tried to make your own brushes, because you don't do anything by halves. And he said, you know what he said to me? He went, I've tried and I can't make them like you and your mum, so it's the only thing I'm willing to sacrifice.
I believe it. It's not something you can just pick up.
I just thought,
there's a big difference between washing your own linseed and making your own brushes.
I thought there's no way that Daniel hasn't tried to make his own brushes. He's doing everything else, you know. But he was so honest. He said, I have tried, but I just can't seem to do it. You love that?
I love it. That's a perfect story.
I know. So I guess what we're taking from you is sometimes if it doesn't work, just hang your hat on that one, right?
Yeah, I mean, I also know artists who stretch their canvases with copper tacks instead of a staple gun. You know, I mean, people do all sorts of things. You just find what works for you.
Yeah.
But you know, I think all of us are constantly finding that balance in terms of tradition versus contemporary versus what tools are just going to work better for us.
Yeah, sure.
And it's changes all the time too. It's not like you make one decision and stick to it. It evolves all the time.
Yeah,
I mean, earlier this year, a lady wrote to me and she was like, well, I bought everything on your materials list, and then I sat down with your video and I went to paint, and what you were using in the video wasn't exactly what was on your materials list. I was like, because I update the materials list all the time. Like it's an evolving, living document, and this is what I found is going to work better. But if you're watching a video I made 5 years ago, yeah, it's going to be a little bit different. But use what I recommend now, but you can still follow the video. But I mean, we're artists, we're not scientists. She was very indignant. I was like, I'm not in a laboratory, you know. Everything is living and breathing and changing all the time.
It evolves. I know. I will just say though, I think some people, when they're starting out, it's so overwhelming and so difficult that they just want to know what you do, and they think, but you were my safety blanket. I did what you asked me to do, and now I can do what you said, you know. So I do get that side of it, because it can be so overwhelming. But yeah, the other side is what do you expect, that Sadie doesn't paint and evolve her own painting over the next 5 years? No, that's not going to happen either. But if you could just stay the same forever, we'll all be okay. Listen, I gotta say, thank you for your time. I really hope that people have enjoyed this. I wanted desperately to talk to you because I haven't had anybody yet that does a lot of online teaching, and I hope that this opens a lot of people's eyes to the online world of how we can move art into the 21st century, for one, where it's filmed at a really high standard, and I know it is, but also that it's at the level that you're teaching. So that was one of the things that I really wanted to touch on with you, and then obviously just everything else that you shared with us is just so kind of you. So thank you, and I hope everybody will enjoy, you know, seeing you today.
Thank you so much, Simi. It's been great talking to you. I should probably mention that I just released a video 2 days ago that's me painting a portrait of my husband.
Yeah.
And really, really excited about that. So I've been following the techniques of Van Dyck and Rubens as I've been doing master copies, and I applied that to a portrait of my husband. So that's a really exciting addition to the online atelier, the subscription, or you can just buy the course by itself.
Well, what I'll do is I'll share it on our Instagram and our Facebook page so that people can see which we were referring to there, which painting. And you know, I just got to say from me and Mum, best of luck as you move forward through this pandemic and evolve more into the online thing. The world is your oyster, and I know that you and Noel together are just absolutely nailing it. So I'm sending you all my love.
One of the things I miss the most about COVID is travel, and
I
I'm
know.
dying to come visit you
I
guys.
know.
And
You are always
I know that you're
welcome.
building a studio soon, and so whenever we can travel again, I'm getting over to Europe and England, and I would love to come see you.
Well, if you ever want to get back into teaching away from the online thing and you wanted to just, it might be different for you because it wouldn't be a full time school thing. But if you did want to
Yeah.
come for a week, oh, you'd be at the top of my list. But I, I,
Oh,
I haven't asked you because I thought you've moved away from that and that's probably what you wanted a break from, you know. But yeah, that's an
I am
open
taking a
invite.
little break from in-person teaching, but when I return to in-person workshops, I will definitely be talking to you.
Yay! Well, I know a lot of people will be really happy to hear that because not everyone can travel as well this side, you know. But yeah,
Yeah.
you are always welcome here, and thank you again for taking the time today.
Thank you so much, Sumi. It was great to talk to you. Say hi to your mom for me.
I will, and we'll catch up soon.